Hola, hola, Coca-Cola. Today we're reading this story, The Curious Garden, and it's written by Peter Brown. The Curious Garden. I've never heard anyone describe a garden as being curious before. I've heard them describe a garden as being full of lots of things to see, lots of things to smell, even lots of things to taste. But I've never heard them talk about a curious garden before. If you look at the cover, what do you see? I see a little boy. I see him sitting on top of a little tree with a watering can. And I see lots of shapes of animals in the trees. Do we often find animals in gardens? Can you tell me some animals that we are likely to find in gardens? Let's use our heads now. Alrighty, let us begin. Here we go. There was once a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. And as you can imagine, it was a very dreary place. It's kind of like what's happening now with COVID-19. We're all inside, we're all at home, and it's not very fun all the time. However, there was one boy who loved being outside. Even on drizzly days, while everyone else stayed inside, you could always find Liam happily splashing around his neighborhood. Does anybody go outside when it rains? Does anybody jump in muddy puddles? Do you put on your botas de agua? Do you get your paraguas y ir afuera? Who goes outside in the rain? Do you like when it rains? A mí me gusta la lluvia. I like the rain. It was on one such morning that Liam made several surprising discoveries. He was wandering around the old railway, as he did from time to time, when he stumbled upon a dark stairwell leading up to the tracks. Tracks? Railway? The railway had stopped working ages ago, and since Liam had always wanted to explore the tracks, there was only one thing for the curious boy to do. Liam ran up the stairs, he pushed open the door and stepped out onto the railway. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of colour. Wildflowers and plants were the last thing he had expected to find up there. But when he took a closer look, it became clear that all the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew that he could help. So he returned to the railway the very next day and got to work. The flowers nearly drowned and he had a few pruning problems, but the plants patiently waited while Liam found better ways of gardening. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants, they began to feel like a real garden. Does anyone here go outside in their garden? When you go outside in your garden, what do? Do you water the plants? Do you trim the leaves that are no longer green? What do you do in your garden? Do you go outside and do you play in the grass? Do you lay in the grass? Do you lay on the ground? What do you do when you go out into your garden? Most gardens stay in one place, but this was no ordinary garden. With miles of open railway ahead of it, the garden was growing restless. It wanted to explore. Oh my gosh, you know what this reminds me of? Have you ever seen pumpkins grow? Pumpkins grow wild. They grow all over the place. Some plants, they grow across, some grow up on a tree. They grow in all different directions. Oh my goodness. The tough little weeds and mosses were the first to move. They popped up farther and farther down the tracks and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. Over the next few months, Liam and the Curious Garden explored every corner of the railway. What do you think is happening? The plants are spreading everywhere. How do you think that would look? Wow, have a look at how the plants are spreading. Can you see it? And they're growing everywhere. They're growing, they're growing, they're growing. Can you remember what plants need to grow? They need sunlight, they need water, they need air, and they have to sometimes be in soil. After spending his spring and summer and autumn with the garden, Liam's time on the railway was finally interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he'd become a gardener, Liam could not wait to visit the plants. He must have been lonely without the plants. Rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it preparing for spring. He got some new supplies, it seems. He got a wheelbarrow, he got a watering can, a rake, a shovel, some more seeds. He was reading about how to tend to his garden when he returned too. After 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over to the railway. Winter had taken a toll on the garden, but thanks to Liam's planning, his handy new tools, and a little help from the sun, the plants soon awoke from their winter sleep. Wow, after winter comes spring, and spring is a time for lots of plants to come in bloom. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and that spring, it was finally ready to make its move. Do you think the garden is going to spread into the city for sure? Let's read on and see. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up farther and farther from the railway and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. The garden was especially curious about old forgotten things. And I see like an old truck in this picture. Do you have any old forgotten things in your garden? A few plants popped up where they didn't belong. Others mysteriously popped up all at once. But the most surprising things that popped up were the new gardeners. Children from all over were getting busy inside the gardens right throughout the city. Look, they were having picnics in the garden. They were jumping from green to green. They were walking barefoot in the garden, and I love to walk barefoot in my garden. They're grounding. They were making animals out of plants. They were doing so many things. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed. But of all the new gardens, Liam's favorite was where it all began, by the railway. Colorín colorado, este cuento se ha acabado. So, my challenge for you today is to go outside in your garden and start planting some seeds. Get busy and let us see how your garden will grow. Adios.